So for me, the theological through lines are simply continuous forms of conscientious conversations and the constructions of sustainable approaches to identifying what people today care about, seeing how we got to where we are, balanced against what things ensure and agreed upon the value of living, and creatively, how is that represented in ways that help to productively ensure our mutual lives moving forward. That has to be a social, a spiritual, a political, an economic, and a human personal identity set of real experiences, and those need to be seen, heard, celebrated mostly in our literature, our songs, our art, our dance, our poetry, our painting, and our representative expressions.
Welcome, welcome. My name is Sujin Pak. I am Dean of the School of Theology, and we are going to have some fun tonight. Yeah, we are. So thank you for being here. Thank you for those who are in the room and anyone joining us from online. I want to give a shout out to the Lowell Institute. The Lowell Lectures have been a grand tradition at the School of Theology, and they have been made possible by the visionary support and generosity of the Lowell Institute. I'm deeply grateful for the ways that the Lowell Institute has partnered with the School of Theology for many years now to support learning, awareness, and conversation. And so this is our wonderful spring Lowell Lecture. We have 2 each year, one in the fall and one in the spring. I'm also grateful for the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground and its interim director, Nick Bates, for co-hosting this event tonight and sharing this spectacular space with us. Nick Bates will serve as our moderator for this evening, whom I will introduce very shortly. And I must name that Andrew Kimball, who is also in the room, he is an amazing partner and visionary. Thank you for your leadership and all your preparation, Andrew, to make this evening possible. The Lowell Lectures this year are focused on questions concerning spiritual dimensions and of artistic expression. Questions, for example, that explore the ways musical experience for artists and listeners alike can be a spiritual experience. This year's Lowell Lectures explores the parallels between theology and music and highlights the gifts musicians bring to the search and quest for meaning and for truth. We are honored to hear from Dr. Bill Banfield in a lecture entitled When Artists Go to Work. And he is joined by the Imagine Orchestra, the current ensemble in residence at Long East School of Music at Bard College. The evening will unfold with a beautiful back and forth set of reflections from Dr. Banfield, along with his orchestral musical performances and a conversation, as well as some Q&A. Now, it is my honor to introduce Nick Bates, Interim Director of Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground and co-host of our lecture tonight. Born and raised in Chicago, Nick attended Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, where he received a bachelor's degree in criminology and criminal justice and a master's in higher education. Nick comes to BU with both teaching experience in gender and sexuality studies, along with residence life experience. He has a vested interest in working with people to develop programs and strategies to reshape socialized perceptions of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality, while fostering an environment for healthy identity development. As interim director, Nick oversees the operations and content of the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground. He has committed himself to thoroughly reading Thurman and finding ways to support members of the community to develop a relationship with the work of Howard and Sue Bailey Thurman. So please join me in thanking the Lowell Institute for making this evening possible, and please join me in welcoming our moderator, Nick Bates.
It's wonderful to see this many chairs on the stage and instruments. This is the first time I've ever seen this. Anytime I do anything here in the Thurman Center, I like to always mention a first ever paid director, Catherine Kennedy, for whom this house was built along with former Associate Provost and Dean of Students, Ken Elmore. We wouldn't have this wonderful 20,000 square foot space that you all are sitting in without the work that they did. And I just like to say that I'm a vehicle of continuing the work that they started. So I look at this stuff and I think about things that they told me in so many conversations that they dreamed of. And I think about what Thurman said in his autobiography when he spoke about his dream was to build a structure that contains state-of-the-art audio-visual equipment for performances, lectures, and et cetera. And we're going to do a little bit of a fusion of that tonight. And so that excites me. Had to share that with y'all because it's on my heart. Really here to give a warm introduction to Dr. Banfield. Composer, educator, author, and jazz guitarist, Dr. Bill Banfield served as professor and director of the Africana Studies Center at Berklee College of Music for 15 years. He taught in the college and graduate program from 2005 until his retirement in 2020 and was the founding director of Black Music Culture Studies. Upon retirement, Berklee named Dr. Banfield Professor Emeritus for his service to the institution. Dr. Banfield is currently Senior Scholar in Residence at the Longy School of Music in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Prior to his roles at Berklee and Longy, he served on the Faculty of Fine Arts at the University of St. Thomas, Minnesota from 1997 to 2005, and on the Faculty of African American Studies and Music at Indiana University from 1992 to 1997, where he developed the Undine Smith Moore collection of scores and manuscripts of Black composers. In the past 30 years, Dr. Banfield has produced a body of music and art scholarship resulting in books, compositions, recordings, student development, and professional service that contributes to contemporary arts leadership. He was commissioned by Quincy Jones to write approaches to and curriculum for teaching the history of American popular music from 2009 to 2013. He is founder and director of Jazz Urbane, a contemporary jazz art recording label dedicated to producing creative new artists. The seminal project Released in 2014 was produced by legendary icon George Duke and included such leading artists as Christian Scott, Terry Lynn Carrington, Najee, Greg Osby, and Grace Kelly. The label has already produced and released 15 albums now heard internationally. Having served 3 times as a Pulitzer Prize judge in American music from 2010, 2016, and 2020, Banfield is an award-winning composer whose symphonies, operas, and chamber works have been performed and recorded by major symphonies across the country, including the National, Atlanta, Minneapolis, Dallas, Akron, Detroit, New York Virtuoso, Grand Rapids, Akron, Richmond, Toledo, Savannah, Chicago Sinfonia, Indianapolis, Sphinx, Sacramento, and San Diego. An author of 9 books on arts and culture, Dr. Banfield was appointed in 2019 as a research associate at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, one of the Smithsonian's 12 research and cultural centers. In 2021, he became composer in residence serving at Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra from 2021 to 2027, and the Interlochen Music Academy from 2022 until 2025. Lastly, he is also a graduate of Boston University School of Theology, earning his Master's of Theology in 1988. Let's give him a warm welcome of applause.
Before we, as I started out, I saw the camera people, and I said, "Oh my goodness, you're filming this." And I said, "Could I have do you mind if I ask if I could have a DVD copy of this you could burn for me?" And the gentleman looked at me and said, we're putting this on YouTube." And I thought, now my wife would really laugh at me because she says, "You're just an old caveman. They don't do that anymore. Students don't even have to, they don't do CDs. They don't do VCRs and, cassettes either. Get over it." Okay. So I'm very glad to know that we are tech influenced today. So good evening. Be you. You look beautiful. And where are all of our, first of all, I'll do School of Theology. Any School of Theology people here? Oh my goodness, I'm afraid now. The everything on love and hugs to our BU folks, and so great to be here. Thankful to your wonderful dean, who's been so kind to engage me this year. And to Andrew, who helped pull all this together. Where is he? He's in the house somewhere, right? And I'm told these days we are always online. And so to those wonderful, beautiful, bright minds and great spirits out there, we truly welcome you to be in the room with us. We thank you for you tuning in. I was speaking to the internet audience at that point. Okay. I'm Bill B. for the internet audience. And we are here at BU. And I'm just honored to be here. And by the way, this wonderful orchestra, aren't they wonderful? They are my family, many of them. One of them even has been with me since we did this at BU almost 40 years ago. We won't say which one it is. We were both 5 years old when we did this 40 years ago. This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art. Toni Morrison said this in her piece, No Place for Self-Pity, No Room for Fear. For me, it has been especially important to get to work because I feel this moment is ripe for taking a deeper interest in the sustainable transformative experiences in education, arts, and culture. As the great writer Jean Cocteau noted, art is not a pastime, but a priesthood. People are each time renewed, awakened, refreshed when they come together and take in that art's sharing. It's moving, it lifts, it makes lasting impressions that are desired to be repeated. Today's sharing with you in this concert event is, we believe, about spirit, sounds and ideas that are a reproduction of that experience art gives, a chance to experience a lift, a spiritual connection, and it also records and marks our time together. And just so the audience understands this, when I mean marking our time together, we're going to dance together. No, I'm not joking. Music is a powerful means to engage the world we live in. Victor Hugo said it best. Music expresses that which cannot be put into words and that which cannot remain silent. I often say, music is the sound of the universe telling you it's time to listen. This is a time when communities see their best potential, when the nation is hungry for happy, hungry for embrace, and hungry for moving powerfully forward and listening to all voices. Music at this level is that captured performance of artistry which represents a path in cultivating impulses and ideas that brings it all together. And we are delivered every time. So, seminarians, that preaches, actually. I have 13, and we're writing, right? We're writing. Yes, I don't see you writing. Or we are texting on something. I have some things to share. 13 big C's of creativity. Got it, guys and ladies? 13 C's of creativity. Number one, culture, which is about people living. The definition and records and evidence of that living is culture, and I love cultural studies, which is really glad. I'm so glad the director here is a fan of cultural studies. They didn't have that when I was in school. I wish they had, and so we had to make up our own cultural studies at the time. So it's very exciting, and I also love that he said, we remember when we were wanting a Howard Thurman Center. I remember in 1988, we said that would be a great thing. And here we are, nearly 40 years later, and we're standing in what? That center. Another C, creation, which is how we dream and how we imagine to make. Craft is the preparation for how that's done, that dreaming. Commitment, you gotta be there. Consistency, sun comes up every morning, waves roll out every day, all day and night. Charge, you gotta have vision and purpose. C, for change, which means transforming things. Community and connections, people's lives really matter. Citizenry is the total humanity of values, a shared sense of equality. Collegial, that is, working teams together. You all hear this all the time. The teamwork makes the dream work, right? And then the other two, and you can add your own, these are mine, are care and compassion. It's all about love. Music, and I share this often with people, that we only should operate out of love. When you operate out of fear or hatred, selfishness, you lose in the beginning and you lose in the end. Music, I believe, is created to win in its welcoming, as it represents ways the culture cares about human expressive experiences. And it's that cultural care captured and crafted into sound, which is what we hear. Music is tones, as I said, organized to tell human stories. The writer Albert Murray put it this way: in truth, it is literature and the arts which establishes the context for social political action. The writer who creates stories or narrates incidents which embody the essential nature of the human spiritual existence also suggests commitments, which will contribute mostly to man and woman's immediate welfare and the ultimate fulfillment as a human being. It is the writer, the artist, who first comes to realize when the time is out of joint, determines the extent and gravity of the current human predicament, describes hidden elements of destruction, sounds the alarm, defines the villain, designates the targets, is the myth maker, the value maker, identifies the conflicts, identities, and the hero, and the good, adequate man and woman, and evokes the image of possibility, prefigures the contingencies of a happily balanced humanity, and the good, great place. Now that's a brother who knew what he was talking about. But the greatest value of music is how it lifts people. So if you live and create great music that lifts someone, you are doing the greatest service possible of having the gift of being a musician. That's why my master's here at BU, all those many years ago when I came here in 1985, that's what I focused on. And I demonstrated that idea with an orchestra all those near 40 years ago. And one of those gentlemen, as I told you, who was with me on that concert stage over in the Thurman, what is it called now? You know, the chapel. A Marsh Chapel, yes. I guess we dreamed it would be called the Howard Thurman Chapel then. But y'all still working on that, right? Okay. That gentleman's name is Richard Kelly, and he's with us in the orchestra. He was with me then, and that is nearly 40 years ago. And again, as I say, we were 8 years old then. Okay, so in my thesis here at BU, I argued for a theological music, which claimed that in music and arts, and for me, black music in particular, there was an opportunity with intention to use the music for a greater lift for community, a greater good. I argued that it was theological music. I traveled to West Africa, Senegal, to perform and study African music. As well, I widened my thesis with additional work at Harvard Divinity, choosing to focus on Richard Wagner's operas, whose advisor was Schopenhauer. And he too argued that the composer was best suited to use their music to raise man and woman's upward mobility. I was next to the University of Michigan to pursue a doctorate in composition and ethnomusicology. And at that point, at 27, I was hired in the Department of Religious Studies, and I worked with the great Harold Cruz, teaching a course on gender and American cultural studies. So they were a little bit ahead of y'all then. After 4 years, they had cultural studies at the University of Michigan, where I did my doctoral work. It was that's where I met Henry Louis Gates and Cornel West, who encouraged me then, little brother, you got to keep on doing what you're doing. We like what you're saying. Of course, we know who Cornel West and Dr. Gates have become, and so they have been very big brothers of mine up until this very day. As a matter of fact, Brother Gates wrote me today and said, do good at BU. And then I went on to Indiana University as an assistant professor in music and Afro-American studies. Back here in Boston in 2001, I was a Du Bois Fellow at Harvard, and then served as the Atelier visiting professor at Princeton under my boss at the time, Toni Morrison. After many years of teaching, I was invited to help engineer the Africana Studies program here in Boston, and my wife and I moved here I moved here in 2005. She said, you go on to Boston. I got work to do. And we were in Minneapolis. She was very instrumental in the work of her education at a wonderful institution there called the American Composers Institute there in Minneapolis. And I didn't know at the time, but she was applying to be the dean at Berkeley. At the same time, she didn't tell me that. And, and they ended up hiring her, and we got here at the same time. So, there's our story. I retired in 2020, and that sounds like an academic dream story, but I did leave out all the climb, the struggles, and the defeats that make a good story even better. But more on that later. One of the enduring courses that I developed over the 30 years, actually, as a professor, one of the first courses that I did at IU was the Theology of American Popular Music. And its premise was that popular artists were the zeitgeist song action of the people, a term I learned here from the great Harold Beck, my ministry and theology professor. In other words, the song is a spiritual soul of the culture. As a TA at University of Michigan, working under Harold Cruz, as I mentioned, he taught me that, and this is from his book, from the 1976 book, the great book, I think it's 69 actually, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. And I just have to say, while Andrew has made sure that I was on time here, I just have to say that that's a book that shaped me. So The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual is one of the great American texts. Everybody should know this book. And he writes in that book, in advanced societies, it is not the race politicians or the rights leaders who create the new ideas and the new images of life and man and women. That role belongs to the artists and the intellectuals of each generation. It is the artists and the creative minds who will and must furnish all of the important content. And again, that's The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, a great book. I stand before you today, BU, sharing that music has been used for a greater purpose, and that is to lift the masses. And I tried to talk about that and tie that into theological actions and meanings. A little bit of a faith manifesto. And everybody knows this one, no matter what religious tradition that you come out of, even the agnostic ones, which are important too. In the beginning, God, she created. That threw you a little bit, right? You weren't expecting the she. But in the beginning, the great spirits and spirit, the great mother of us all, created. Art is always about the relentless search for freedom and the time to create. Music arts is more than just that. These phenomena of human creative practices are gifts from God meant to be shared with people. Arts are tied to a grounded allegiance of higher values that transcend what one sees, but one feels, believes in, and does. Art's allegiance is governed by the power of creativity. That commitment never seeks to be powerful over anybody. It seeks to be a service to others. And one of the byproducts of art at its best is that when others experience art, creativity, and the expressions of that creative love work, the immersion inwardly to tap into that larger creative power brings about a transformative energy that, for lack of a better word and concrete word, is that art lifts the soul. That work to lift others is what a true artist understands of their human purpose every time people are met by creative acts of love. And that love is witnessed in a painting, or seeing dancers swirl, hearing the evocative words of a great story or a poem, and the feeling seeing a great band gives you. This grounded allegiance of art's works transcends all national, global boundaries, as people in every culture are giving touch to their deeper human meaning through the participation of rituals of arts that records and fuel human experiences. The more we seek to understand what it means to be human, the more we extend our very own existence. I'm very interested in the ways that culture and education define human ascension. The importance of being a carrier of culture and a craftsman and craftsmanship, everybody's ship, is absolutely critical. I made that word up, okay. That's the bigger through lines to connect across time, people's cultures, and are the connective tissues that make human narratives thread and relate. We're talking about values, human expressions, and how these define and sustain people. Music, and even just talking about it, if you really listen to it, is more than just music. Because it's about stories, it's about lyrics, it's about values, it's about emotions, brought on by reacting to its almost magical language of the soul through the rhythms, the tones, and its journeys through cultures. So for me, the theological through lines are simply continuous forms of conscientious conversations and the constructions of sustainable approaches to identifying what people today care about, seeing how we got to where we are, balanced against what things ensure and agreed upon the value of living, and creatively, how is that represented in ways that help to productively ensure our mutual lives moving forward. That has to be a social, a spiritual, a political, an economic, and a human personal identity set of real experiences, and those need to be seen, heard, celebrated mostly in our literature, our songs, our art, our dance, our poetry, our painting, and our representative expressions. Again, what kinds of conversations would this be? And what possibilities would we discover if we did this each day that we lived? And that's one of the things that drives me in art, is that it gives you the opportunity to engage those questions. And you don't know what the responses are going to be, except I believe that they always lift people, has been my experience. And lastly, how do we commit to our work and connect that thread of that through line and create a transformative impact and hold on? There's hope in living and holding on with both hands, as the old spiritual says, hold on, and it will land you in your promised lands. The church and the university are places where art and culture should thrive. The themes that we're addressing, the idea of a ministry of arts and contemporary faith studies and creativity, is in short the expression of these things. And I would argue for so many of our teachers here, many of you, that is really a pedagogy of existentialism. It's a pedagogy of spiritual existentialism, actually. Creative acts are statements of love and faith and employ people to be lifted, as I said, to be moved and to be happy. But art makes us feel, wow, this is beautiful. When people feel that way, they can act in some awesome ways too. To do creative, expressive things and music is a work of purpose, and it is your call and gifting, and it is always welcoming, even if it shakes us up sometimes. It's welcoming to have a mind opened up because things get in there that hopefully expand that mind. The role of arts is best seen as a work of culture and heritage preservations, particularly Black music arts. Music, poetry, dance, literature are all creative extensions of the human gifting from God focused on cultural lift, societal transformation, as seen in the cultural movements in every era we've known, at least in this country that we live in. And the rest of the world also looked at those movements, and they are still looking at those movements. We're talking about the spirituals, bottom of the 19th century, top of the 20th century, with the Fifth Jubilee Singers. No one had ever heard that kind of stuff before. It changed American music forever. The civil rights, not to jump over jazz and bebop, 1943, Duke Ellington. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that what? Hello, y'all. Hello. Civil rights movement, which we know. We've seen that on TV. Some of us were even living back then, not me, but some of y'all were. The Black arts movements led by someone like Amiri Baraka, hip hop, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter. These are all movements that were steeped in the notion of communities who were imbued with the sense of taking charge of the world we live in and having a careful step and a causation of impact with the work that they did. When people see experiences in art in these ways, they can become chains in perspectives. Once you change your perspective, you act on changing the way you live in the world. You take a look at that man in the mirror. Now I'm going to ask you all to sing this with me, because my wife is an opera singer, but God did not bless me with an opera voice. So I'm starting, come on, sing with me. I'm starting with the man and the woman in the mirror. I'm asking him or her to what? Change their ways and what? No message could have been any clearer. If you want to make if you want to make a world a better place, take a look at yourself and make that what? Change. Woohoo! You know the song. The civil rights social protest years were tunes like Bob Dylan's Times are changing. That would be Bob Dylan. Aretha Franklin, sing with me. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Find out what it what? See, some of y'all are old enough to remember some Aretha Franklin. And the name of that song was called what? Respect. Okay. And then there was Carole King's. Yeah, You've Got a Friend. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running, to see you again. Here's the punchline. Everybody go. And winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you got to do is call, and I what? And I'll be there. I've tried to get every gospel choir I know to sing this tune. All you got to do is change you to Jesus, or the Buddha, or the great rabbi, or whoever, and it would be totally appropriate for synagogues, temples, and churches all over the world. You got a friend, right? Does that preach, seminarians? Okay, so seminarians, the next church appointment you get, or temple appointment you get, or community center you are over, you make sure you have everybody sing what song? You Got a Friend. There you go, there you go. And Earth, Wind, and Fire. Keep your head to the what? Good. Got some people that were actually around in the 1980s. That's pretty amazing. And the other one that Earth, Wind, and Fire I love is, that's the way of the world, what? Plant a flower and you'll what? Grow a pearl. Grow Pearl. Listen to some Earth, Wind, and Fire. These thoughts on faith and arts culture, music, dance, literature, paintings, image, spoken word, film, have been parts of my work in the Christian education ministry, and I am an AME exhorter. Very proud of that. I was appointed by the AME Church a few years ago, and it's this very interesting role. And we found out that the last exhorter we know of that really did something was Frederick Douglass right here in this state. So I feel very proud to fall in the footsteps of that incredible man who actually went, before he did his abolitionist speeches, all over the world. He was the most famous individual in the 18th century, sorry. Whew. Yes, 18th, right, yes. Yes. Barack Obama didn't have as many pictures of him. Neither did the Bushes or any other politician. Did not. Michael Jackson might have had more pictures than Frederick Douglass. But Frederick Douglass was the most photographed person in those years, very famous. We artists believe that creative works are a reflection of God's holistic promise to be among us. We use our gifts, our God purpose, to lift spirits, to give joy, healing, to inspire others, to deepen our spiritual relationship with the God above, foster care among each other, and to be agents of this elevating of minds and illuminating paths. I had a great theology professor at Harvard, and I said, Professor, and I'm forgetting my dear professor's name, Gordon Kaufman. And I said, what should theology do? And he said, young man, the role of theology is to illuminate people's minds and to move the people beyond. I never forgot that. So I think the performance of a dance, the painting, the poem we talked about, celebrates and imbues others' lives with victories and moves them to meaning, to be transforming the world that we live in. I have a lot of other things that I wanted to say, but you know what? I'm just going to let the music speak. And I know the director here, and I have a few things to talk about to engage the audience. But I'm going to close with these last words. And just email me. I'll send you the speech, and you can read the other stuff later. When Kendrick Lamar says, "We gonna be all right," that's hard to ignore as a social faith stance declaration of some real value for many young people today. Musicians, artists just channel and champion human experience so powerfully that without the music and the dance and the poetry and the images, life would be a blank canvas with straight lines and echoes in a plastic cup. What would a view of faith be or be seen through if we look through the lens of art and creativity and what art ministry through faith is gained? Art gets you to faith as a door. Art as a ministry of building faith. Faith then, too, is heightened and embodied because creativity is being seen as a priority in God's place. And in terms of evangelism, art says all are welcome. If you are moved by creative art, you might potentially intrinsically love the God act of creativity, which I love that statement in the one biblical tradition that we look at, which says, in the beginning, God created. Now, that can't be a better mantra forward and call to action for any creative person than that. In the beginning, God, she created. So music does these things, and it touches lives in these various ways. And I'll repeat this, the greatest value in music is how it lifts people. So if you live as a creative musician, a creative artist, and you're doing art and culture and humanities and poetry and things of the soul, you're really doing the greatest gift and the greatest work you could possibly do in this world as a creative person. So in conclusion, yay! Seminarians, theologically, spiritually, this has to do not only with creative acts, but the processes that our gift is framed in, and that is gift management. It has to do with how individuals are arranged in an enterprise and a practice of interpreting cultural spiritual meanings, defining heritages, and impacting historical directions of consequence. This is art theology praxis. This is about interpreting creative action as an impulse, expression of faith that transcends the boundaries of doctrine and yet invites believers to consider art as a revelation in revealing how God and creative movement speaks to souls and moves women and men to see the wonders of living as the handiwork of a present, loving, all-seeing, all-dancing, and all-singing and playing God. In the beginning, God created. BU, thank you so very, very much. Thank you so very, very much. And I think the fabulous director here and I are supposed to do a rap together. Are you ready, director? Yeah, did you know that? See, they didn't tell you that, right? Blame it on Andrew. We're going to do a great song by a group called Arrested Development. You ready? You ready? Well, let's go. You want to talk? Okay, what are we going to talk about? Okay, so the last time I did this, I almost fell because I'm 35. Oh, yes. Andrew says, don't do that to us. Do walk down. So I will. By the way, our listening audience, we're having a great time here. We hope that we've extended that spirit to you all. We hope that you're at the couch at home and you're relaxing with family, and we're wishing that you were here with us. But quite frankly, we wish you were there with you all relaxing as well. But I'm going to make everybody in here dance. So you might see some people dancing in a little while to this music. By the way, I'd like to give a round of love to my incredible friends here and family. This is my family here, the Imagine Orchestra. And I'm going to ask them to come up and take their places as we talk, and then you're going to hear them play. Do you want to hear them play? Hey. Our musical director. She can tell you a little bit about this piece, but she is
So listen, if you're in the audience, especially the seminarians, make sure you get your questions ready, because he told y'all to, and he told y'all to take notes. I get to do a lot of these, and this one is particularly special. The last time the Lowell Lecture was here in the Thurman Center in the fall, Dr. Emmett right here
in the house.
Was the speaker, and I was sad that I missed it. I heard it was wonderful, and so I'm happy I get to be here the second time around. But particularly, I always enjoy the ways I get the opportunities to push Thurman. I'd be remiss to be in the Thurman Center and not talk about Howard Thurman. So I have this question for you, and make sure you all get your questions ready. I think we'll have a microphone around for you all to ask some questions. Microphone on the side if you want to ask a question. But today, earlier, I was reading The Growing Edge, and there's this piece in there where Thurman says, "The sermon is an act of worship in which the preacher exposes his spirit and his mind as they seek to reveal the working of the Spirit of the living God upon them. It is a searching moment. The atmosphere is one charged with the dynamics of worship and the surrender and commitment which worship inspires. I wanted to know your thoughts about that when you think about music.
Well, I think that some of what I have begun to develop in terms of a spirituality was definitely the work of Minister Great Thought Thurman. And that was very evident, which is why we prayed and hoped for such a center that you're the director of 35 years ago. It's just amazing. And I think some of the things that I said in my talk had to do with the engagement of the world through the creative agencies of the Spirit. And that's a ritual. And that ritual, we are called to actually engage our people in wonderfulness. And I learned this in Africa, that when there's a good song, the Spirit will descend. And I use that to talk about the African diasporic notion of, there is Descartes' notion of, I think, therefore I am. The African notion is we be, therefore we be. Or something like that, Our beingness is the fact that we are together in our beingness, and that is our humanity. It's an existential notion based on the idea that we are always in engagement with our human fellows. And in that ritual of that connection, I think the Thurman piece is very critical and very much aligned to that it becomes a responsibility of the community to consciously pull people together to figure out how we're going to live in this God-created world. So I very, very much appreciated you framing us tonight in that. That's absolutely very important. I really appreciate that.
So, and I'm going to bring a lot of Thurman here, y'all. I'm sorry, y'all, but I'm not sorry, because y'all going to love it and appreciate it. And if not, I don't understand why you're in the Thurman Center. So I watched you on a podcast with, I believe, Bethel AME here in Boston. And you talked about this idea of music being movement, right? There's powerful in music that causes us to move. But you started to put it in correlation to movements like you mentioned earlier. So I'd be curious if you could expand on that a little bit about how we think about how music causes us to move, but also movements cause us to act or move on something.
It's called Motown. And I didn't mean to. You're so excited.
Go ahead.
I'm so excited.
Go ahead.
I felt I knew you were going with that. It's called Motown, and it's called Dancing in the Streets. And it's called all kinds of songs like What's Going On, and I Got Soul, and Bob Dylan, and all that stuff, which the music called people into action. It wasn't just action for the sport of protest. It was for action that was transformative, and it was not a sport. It actually was living in the streets to make a difference in how we were going to live in the world. And it's because of that motion of feet in the streets that changed the world. And so I kind of think that is what we talked about with the incredible Carrington Moore, Reverend Carrington Moore at Bethel AME, who is a dynamic preacher there under the incredible Hammonds that are there. And we talked much like this in that thing, that talk. And he asked us to talk about the notion of that kind of movement in the world. And when people move, they move the world. And so we have to get people moving in order to activate change in the world and bring peace. And so I think that movement and the civil rights movement, although it seems cliche, I do remember being a child in the 60s. And I remember being marched by the state's troopsmen back and forth to school. It used to be that only old people talked about that, so I guess I'm becoming an older person who remembers what it was to be a child and we had to be taken to school with tanks behind us in Detroit because it was the middle of the riots. And so you always got this sense of people moving for the righteousness towards truth. And it was a great cost. But we are here together in this room because of people like Thurman and because of the movement and action of citizens in the streets who believed in truth and action for the good of the people. And that changed the world. It wasn't just America that was significant for. It was significant for the motherland that's 3 times the size of the United States. That would be the continent of Africa. At the time when colonialism had to, bye-bye, go away. And then agency began to happen. Women's movements began. And we got to hear people like Aretha Franklin and Joni Mitchell a little more frequently. And it was that kind of movement of the music and the activism of the people and the music, and that the people believed that the singers and the musicians were saying things that mattered to people. And that's what changed the world. Now, I'm a musician. It could be the politicians signing bills of, rites of passage in the Civil Rights Act and all that. I think that was great, but, right? But the musicians know, hey, y'all, we knew that all along. We've been singing about this since the blues. So I think that this notion of activation, I'm long-winded because in 30 years I became a professor. So it's kind of become a little bit of the trademark to talk a lot, but I'm really anxious to talk more and to talk to the audience. But I think you bring up a very good point, because movement is sometimes, particularly in the African tradition, when a long time ago it was dismissed. What are they doing? They got so much rhythm. No, they got a lot of life. That's what they got. And you need to get on that life cycle. So I think movement in that regard means also movement of the mind and movement of the soul and the spirit. And it manifests itself in body action, motion, but it's all tied to how we move with the planet. I really believe that. Do you get that? And let's not just talk about these things in terms of a cliche. Really, when I remember when I was just a child then, in the 1970s and 80s, I had a student ask me one day, Dr. Banfield, what was it like to live in the 80s? I laughed too. But I remember all the great music. It was about dancing in motion with the righteousness of truth and activism and communities. And so for us as musicians, we really appreciate, it's why I asked you all to dance, to get up and dance. Duke Ellington, they were a really elegant group. And they went to places that people would just, they were so killing, people would just sit down. He said, no, don't sit down. We want you to dance to this music. It's meant to move as well. So I think the notion of music and movement is very much aligned.
Make sure y'all get your questions ready, because I could be up here all day and I could nerd out. So I just want to make sure y'all get your questions ready. So you used a quote about priesthoods. And yep. It really struck me, because I was curious for you today, in popular music or music in general. There are legends and our elders. Who are the young people that you would say have this sort of priesthood to what they do?
I think you could look at, I love Tank and the Bangas, actually, out of New Orleans, because they really go right at their tradition of New Orleans, which is about in the street, what? Second line, marching, right? New Orleans second line. It's about moving very slowly in spirit at the funeral, right? Because, we got to pay attention to the spirits and gods. And once that body's in the ground, it's time to move and celebrate that person is moving beyond to a beautiful realm. So I think that notion of New Orleans is something that we saw very early on in this country. It was the #1 musical city in the country in the late 18th century. The #1 musical city in the country was not Boston or New York or Detroit, which is the #1 musical city in the world. Second to that was New Orleans for a long time. And then a lot of Detroit musicians started hanging out with the New Orleans musicians. New Orleans musicians started hanging, and then Motown was born. But that's another story. That thing incorporated Tank and the Bangas moves to other young musicians. I mean, I like Robert Glasper. I have a group of friends that we meet every Friday. And, the older musicians are trying to get with the Robert Glasper things. Esperanza Spalding, I knew. Esperanza Spalding helped me to actually create what is called the Jazz Urbane.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing this club here, a place called Daryl's. And it was really cool because the symphony musicians were coming, and everybody, and the New York Times called it one of the hottest night spots in the country on Monday nights, because musicians aren't working. So so they're able to come to this thing at Daryl's right here. And And this thing got mentioned. We started the Jazz Urbane because I thought it was important to bring the older people like me together with Esperanza and other musicians. We had Christian Scott, we had Grace Kelly. These are all, Kevin, what is Kevin's last name? Kevin from Motown. Kevin, oh my gosh, hope he doesn't see me forgetting his names. Big Motown singer, was from here at Boston with us. These were Jazz Urbane artists. We started the label because of that relationship, but it's because of younger musicians taking it on. And Esperanza was one of them. So there are a number of them out there. This Christian Scott is really happening, a New Orleans musician who is the nephew of big Indian chief Donald Harrison, Big Chief Donald Harrison. Donald Harrison is one of my dear friends. And actually, we talked about Emmett Price, the new dean of black music, the first dean of black music, by the way, in the country. I think that deserves a round of applause. Can you believe that? Dr. Emmett Price is the dean of black music. I just like the way that sounds. The dean of black music. And when I was there in that wonderful center that he overlooks now, we had Big Donald Harrison come in and bless the room. So Donald Harrison brought his Indian, and because he's a big chief. No, I mean like Indian Mardi Gras chief. Yeah, officially. So he danced the spirit in, and his musicians played in the Africana Study Center to bring the spirit in. And his nephew is Christian Scott, who's one of the leading trumpet players. You heard this young man, Emmett Price. That's his son, by the way. Emmett Price, big Emmett, and almost big Emmett back in the back here on trumpet. But the New Orleans musicians are really happening. And we talked about, so those are some. People talk about Kendrick Lamar, who won the Pulitzer Prize, if you can believe it, for rap and hip hop. I was not the judge that year. but we talked a lot about Pimp a Butterfly, which is his really cool record. And it talked about this thing. It is a very piece that's based on the poetry and the philosophy of the transformation of a butterfly and how our lives are like that. So we have actively young musicians in hip-hop culture as well, and spoken word and music. And I didn't talk about the other arts, but in terms of music, those are some of the thinking that from artists that I respect that help inform me about what's going on today. Thank you for that.
Want to take questions?
Hey, Dr. Banfield, thank you so much. I have a question from our online audience.
Yes.
This is from one of our seminarians,
Sure.
third year MDiv, Cynthia Perry.
Okay. Hi, Cynthia.
This is her note to you. Good evening, Dr. Banfield. My name is Cynthia. I'm a third-year MDiv student at STH, and I'm currently taking a class at Harvard Divinity School entitled Black Political Thought and the Spirit of Freedom. We're currently discussing the power of music as political thought and action.
Wow.
A classmate brought up the topic of cultural appropriation. Her question: how should we engage with those who borrow, mimic, and profit off of black music when they have or do not have the history or the struggle of our ancestors who used music to lead them, comfort them, and inspire them to freedom? In other words, they have the benefit of our music but not the burden. Is God still in their version? Thank you.
Oh.
Only a seminarian student from BU who's studying at Harvard Divinity would ask such a question. And I'm glad, because that's exactly what I had to do and what I love to do. I mean, we were something called the BUTI. Does that still exist here? BUTI? Does it still exist? Okay. When we were at Harvard, when we were at BU, we could go. So I took some classes at Harvard Divinity School and some classes at Gordon Conwell, I think, and my other classes here. And so we were going in this way at these different divinity schools at the time. And at Harvard, we had to read a book a week. When I had my students read a chapter, they complain now. So at Harvard Divinity, we had to have a book a week. And there were like 13 books for the semester or something crazy like that. And you had to know the entire book. So I really appreciate that student seminarian's question, because it's exactly what a lot of the students that I had in my classes, Emmett has in his classes at Berkeley now, is they're asking, how do we deal with Elvis? How do we deal with Eminem? Scratch your head, right? And there's an Elvis movie out now where he has a scene in the movie where he goes to the black church. And he says, wow, I can make that into shake and grind, or whatever he did, shake, 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 shake. So, the thing that we most appreciate is that the world said very early on, if you want to look at modernity, you're going to have to look at black musicians. They were saying that in Europe in the 1890s. Anton Dvorak said in 1893, the future music of the world must be founded upon what are called the Negro melodies. They are the folk songs of America, and your composers must turn to them. That meant George Gershwin, and then there was the very smart, wonderful Harvard student who wrote a thesis in 1935. Yes? Yes. And his name was Leonard Bernstein, and he lived in Roxbury, by the way. Those Bostonians that are here. He said that the Negro language and music and tone colors and rhythms, he went on of about 25 typologies. He said these are the essential elements that if we want to be great musicians, we're going to have. That was his Harvard thesis, the absorption of race elements into American culture. That's Leonard Bernstein's thesis. So to our wonderful student to ask that, there are vestiges, not even vestiges, there are documents and testaments about the importance of black music. And I think the way that I try to talk about, and we have all these, interestingly enough, wonderful folks here who are Berkeley professors. What we generally say when I try to cool some of the hot points of that question that your wonderful seminarian asked is that when you share a gift like that, you just share it unconditionally. You don't ask how it was abused. You thank God for how it was used. And that's what I would say to that.
Thank you for everything you shared. I'm very much in the similar space like you as a theologian, but also artist. I'm a poet.
Oh, wow.
And I just gave talk in the coastal consultation through the, different seminaries coming together. It's interesting to live in that liminal space. I mean, to theologians, I talk about poetry. To poets, I want to talk about theology, And I'm just wondering, for you, as a theologian, artist, or musician, do you do, say, exegesis of your own work? Like when you share a piece, obviously it's a spiritually birthed piece. Some artists say, I want to live for people to interpret whatever they like, right? But as a theologian, somehow you want to say, this is, how I come about, and you want to communicate faith. So I'm just starting a blog, trying to share how every poem, how that's burst, the context and all that. But in the meantime, I don't want to limit my reader's imagination. I'm just wondering how you sit with that, and what do you do with your own creation? Do you, I mean, T.S. Eliot just published 700 pages of a volume about his poems. People published his, but they made all the notes. 2/3 of that is notes about his poems. So I'm not sure how he feels about that. I can ask you.
I think that's a wonderful question. And I would just say to you, can we hear a few words of your poetry?
Sorry?
Can we hear a few words of your poetry?
Okay. Oh, no. Okay. Where are you going? Where are you going? To the waterfall and pray with the palms. Spring flowing from the depth of the earth. To the wild field to put the flowers on my head as a bride. To the Arctic, fingers brushing through the night. I can't remember everything, but to the ocean and watching millions of glittering gold melting in the liquid silk. To the desert, dancing in the rhythms of bleeding. Yeah, in the bleeding desert with the rhythm of didgeridoo. I'm from Australia, by the way.
Yes.
to the mountaintop, to blow the horn, to the valley of the souls. Will you return? When the kookaburra's laughter echoes with sounds, with the roars of heaven, with thousands of acclamations, I will return. I don't remember everything.
So, you are witnessing something. May I set that beautiful poem? Has it been set to music yet?
It's actually, yeah.
It has been.
But it's already, I performed with the music and images.
Okay. So,
On YouTube.
well, we should talk. I love that. And the thing with composition and commissions and what have you is that Richard Wagner was someone that just felt like he didn't want to wait for the poets. So he wrote his own text. Also, he didn't want to get in trouble with publishing, which is what we have to do. I mean, I have an opera that's called Soul Gone Home, and it is with a Langston Hughes poem. And it's an opera, one-act opera that Nina Freelon, the very great jazz singer, has done and has recorded. It's called Soul Gone Home. And at the time when I wrote it for Nina, I had to fuss a little bit with the Hughes estate. And then a wonderful gift happened. The Hughes estate claimed that Soul Gone Home was now public domain, so I can use it all the time now without having them chasing me for usage things. So we're always looking for poets. That's why I asked you to read it. It's so beautiful. It's evocative of I could see the movement in your words, and the spirit that's in your very language is what resonates with me immediately. I hear the rhythms, I hear the imagery. To get back to your question, this idea of interpreting and then translating your work for others to hear it. I'm in the composer in residence now with the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra, and also composer in residence with a place called Tanglewood, which is where, not Tanglewood, sorry, that's Boston. Interlochen, which is in Michigan, Traverse City, Michigan. And one of the things that I'm doing with the musicians in both of these situations is, in fact, doing just what you asked. Taking some time with the orchestra to talk about the rhythm and the phrasing of the music and give them a sense of what I intended. So when they play it, it has a kind of sensibility as the Imagine Orchestra. These guys laugh at me and they talk about me all the time. So we laugh together so they can play my music because they just laugh at it and they and then we play it. And then it just makes sense because it's part of my soul as my soul is a part of their soul. So we have that kind of thing together. When I'm teaching and talking about music, I actually break the scores open and talk about the rhythms and the sonorities. For us musicians, it's rhythm and then the color of the chords. So when we get from the color of the chords, the sense of ideas and the colors of our imagination is how I begin to talk about how music translates to that kind of notion of poetry and ideas and rhythm and what have you. So to answer your question in a short way, the way I look at it is I actually hear the impulses that you talked about. I hear them in music. So when you do that, I was already, you know what I'm saying? I was already hearing the flow of the rhythm and the ideas. And I think that's the way I've been able to talk to musicians about how to make that correlation between ideas that are on the page, rhythms that are on page, and then the sounds that come out of those rhythms and what's on the page. Was that helpful at all? Did I get at it? Oh, yes, I could tell that translation was going on. Bravo to your translators in the back and the people who have the poetry. I mean, if I had to do my scores, of which they're like, gosh, a lot of scores. I don't remember anything, which is why I even forget the names of my songs up here, and they have to remind me, old man, that name of that song is such and such. And by the way, it starts on beat 1 and not beat 2.5. So they very much help me with that. So we're always trying to remember what our writings are. So I really appreciate you from calling from your soul and the folks in the back to help you out with that. I thank you for what you allowed us to talk about, actually. This is why we had an engagement about how to translate the work into spirit. And then, because all the students, and I have professors here, we have got 2 chairs up here at Berkeley, by the way. You know, when you're talking, Greg, to your students, and when you get the chance to talk to them in the faculty, you know, there is this question they have about, and we have a lot of PKs. Everybody know what a PK is? I know BU, we know it. PKs for the audience out there is preacher's kids, you know? Preacher's kids, a lot of them running around, causing havoc in the world. And a lot of great musicians are PKs. And I think that they understand and they talk. We have a lot of students who are PKs in these classes, and they're always asking, how do I make my faith evident in the music that I do? So I think the question that you asked and the question that our audience asked from the seminary is thank you so much for allowing us to engage in that idea. And it'll just be something that'll continue to percolate with us tonight. So we thank you for that. Yes, sir.
2 questions.
Yeah, quick question. I'm Dan Carmen. I'm a third-year MDiv, and I study theology and the arts.
Wow!
And my question is on art and transcendence.
Yes.
And sort of what you were speaking to in terms of the transformation of the world.
Yeah.
In the same way that art can also, that music and film and literature can sort of inspire people for the fact that not just the religious but also the non-religious to come together.
Sure.
And so if we don't see maybe a transformation of the world sort of outright, to see a transformation internally and
Sure.
to sort of buy into that. And I was wondering what your thoughts were, where people sort of buy into that with regarding to like music festivals and sort of that desired community of a world
Yes.
within their own, if not internalized.
Yes. The music speaks beyond what our words say. They do. And the more you talk about what music is supposed to do, the more you should sit down and shut up and let it do what it's supposed to do. That's what you learn. That's what we learn, right? Right, musicians? I mean, you don't have to say a word. You just play and people start crying. They just start crying. What you crying about? That music reminded me of my uncle who died last week and he loved that song. You never know where your music and your art is going to land on somebody's soul, which is why it's so powerful and why people try to stop it. They try to stop everything that's good in this country. Anything that's good and for truth, they try to stop it. Now, why is that? But the musicians, they say, remember when in Titanic, the boat was going down, musicians were still playing, baby. Why the musicians still playing? They still playing. Hope will make us float. and so the musicians are always, the artists, they always are imbued with this notion of how we will survive. Yeah. And that truth of survival and freedom is embedded in every time you hear a poet. And every time you see a dancer dance, and every time you see a painting, it's about the freedom to speak to the soul of humanity. That's what artists are doing. So we don't have to say anything, although we like to say a lot of things, because we got a lot of talking musicians. They're all brilliant people. They're always talking all the time. But if we just played our music, we would do an equally powerful job, if not more powerful, if we just played the music. Music will and arts will lift the people. Well, you heard, I don't mean to be redundant. You said everything right there. And it transcends the borders and the boundaries of the restrictions of the categories that we place on existence. That box over there is red. That box over there is blue. That box over there is purple. No, it ain't. That's the box you put it in. Don't put things in a box. Let people experience this stuff. And I don't mean to preach, but it's a really important question you ask, because we're often asked that. Why does our art, what are you doing? And we say we're just doing what the spirit of the music says do. And then people are moved by that. I know it sounds really cliche. I know it sounds a little cliche, but it's just the reality of what we witness. When you see that happening, you be like, oh man, this music is, this is something. I better not mess with that. Every musician who's serious and every artist who's serious, they don't mess with the music. Did you all see Tar yet? Oh. Whatever you think about that movie, I love it because it deals with a certain type of understanding, whether it goes over the top, which I think is what the movie is about. But there's something essential about the power of music that every tradition and every generation sees, and it's that transcendence I think you're asking about, the thing that translates to the soul, that the musician has to be at their top craft in order to be worthy of being a musician. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Music says, you better get your act together if you're going to dance with me. And so musicians work very hard to get that together. And I know my musicians here who are really wonderful want to play more now for you so we can dance. So thank you so much. And I have to check with the Dean and Andrew. What's our time like? Oh, the Dean says, let's say that again. The dean says, we'd be glad to hear more music. So everybody, the Imagine Orchestra, give it up. And give it up for this man, too. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Everybody up, up, up. Come on, y'all, come on. Oh. Thank you.